Welcome to the Emergency Management Network interview series, Leaders and Innovators, brought to you by Buffalo Computer Graphics, DLAN, one unified solution for all your emergency management needs. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. And I'm really excited to have a good friend of mine on the show today, Andrew Boyarsky. And he just came out with his book, Riding the Wave. It's applying project management science in the field of emergency management. And I've been saying this for a while, and Andrew and I have been talking about this for a bit, about how project management is really what we do in emergency management at the end of the day. And I was able to sit in a class that he put on at the pre-conference at the IEM for Region 9, and it was an awesome class. I learned a lot, and I'm actually using some of the lessons I learned in his class as I'm doing the local hazard mitigation planning project. So, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to join you as always.
So this is really your show today, because it's about you, it's about your book, and what you've been doing. So, okay, so I have two questions. First of all, for anybody who's ever tried to write a book, it's such a daunting process. So, like, why did you decide to write this, and why did you feel there was a need?
Well, I think because some of us did have at least some time on our hands during the pandemic. I had already started writing the book. I started writing it, I want to say, about 6 or 7 years ago. I had written a proposal for the book, and I wrote the book partly as really out of a need that I had that stemmed back to the beginning of my career when I became a project manager by accident. And so it was a situation where you're looking to scratch an itch that you've had for a very long time. And then I realized that certainly I wasn't the only person who had this type of need out there for some project management methodology in order to manage the projects that I was assigned to or responsible for. And so that began that journey. And it's it's a tough one, that solitary journey. The good thing about it, though, is that as I like to say, you get by with the help of your friends, and that includes, you to folks that you can actually speak to and ask what sort of methods and practices and those sorts of things that are relevant, and what sort of problems, what are the challenges that we all have in dealing with the complexities and the risks that we deal with on a regular basis, whether those are the grand risks that we have to deal with in emergency management, the emergencies, disaster incidents, those sorts of things, as well as the administrative hurdles that we have to overcome to get our job done.
I learned a lot in your class. I think that putting the theory, that's in books, onto paper and into the actions in the classroom. And I know that you've been teaching project management for a bit. What have you learned during your process of teaching the class, number one, and then actually implementing those lessons that you have learned into the real world?
I think one of the key things is that the methodology in and of itself is not a cookie cutter or approach to getting things done. It is a methodology, when it's practiced, that can be very effective in engaging people. I think there's really, I think, some major skills, of course, every project manager needs to have. I think on the people-based skills, two of them are the ability to negotiate, and a project manager is always negotiating for time, for resources, for the requirements, and so that's one part of it. And then I think the other part is just bringing people together and getting people on the same page and dealing with conflicts, having people come to a consensus on what the goal is, and how do we achieve that goal, and what's reasonable, practical, given whatever resources that are available, the budget that you have, funding, those sorts of things. So I think those are some of the, at least two things that I see, and those are pretty large, sort of general areas. But the methodology itself, really, I think, when it's practiced well, and it's not just, oh, we do this in isolation. It's an integrated methodology. That's what I think is so powerful about project management, and in the conversations I've had with people. So, and it's, there's a lot to learn, and there's always something that can be learned along the way. And then for me, my purpose is what I've been doing over the past, let's say, 3+ decades, is really been on that journey of learning and practice, and then bringing that back from the classroom into my practice, and then vice versa. So it becomes a continuous improvement cycle.
So has there been pushback? Has anybody ever said to you, hey, why are we doing this? Emergency management isn't project management. And how did you overcome that pushback and get them to be on your side?
Yeah, I have encountered folks who are resistant to the idea of basically engaging in the planning process. And I think one of the things that oftentimes I'll see is that folks will say, they'll be resistant at the beginning, and I think over time, they'll they warm up to the fact, they get it. So in one of the early meetings I had, as an example, one of, I'd say, the principals in the project, the principal customer, when we sat down, one of the first things I did was to go over the project scope. And I had taken, there was of course, a project contract, or a mutual agreement that we had. It was quite lengthy, had a lot of set of requirements. And I took that and I put it into what I use currently as a basic scope statement, goal, justification for the project, some of the major constraints, critical success factors, things like that. And I remember, as I recited this and went through it sort of methodically, the person said, hey, why are we going through this? And I said, well, first of all, it's kickoff meeting. Second of all, I want to make sure everyone's on the same page, and that what we had agreed to is what we're looking at doing. Even though you may have read the contract, I just want to make sure these are some of the essential items that I pulled out. And then as we got into planning the project further from that, and a few weeks after that, later on, he had said to me, you know what? I was skeptical at first as to why, and now I understand why, and I get it. And that person, who remained nameless, is I'd say one of the biggest proponents of this type of methodology and approach to planning projects and emergency management.
I mean, that's what we do, right? I mean, at the end of the day, even a response in one aspect of it is really managing that project of the response. So, excuse me.
Sure.
Even if, oh my Lord, hang on a second. Let me take a sip here. Oh man, it's that the allergies are getting at me. So even like, even though we're not maybe necessarily managing a project in the essence of things, where it's like, it's a command system and stuff, when you really take a deeper look at it, that's truly what it is, right? In my mind, at least. What do you think of it? Am I wrong on that, Andrew, or am I correct?
Um, well, let's see. I think, let me just sort of step back a moment and sort of put this into, sort of a framework, right? So one of the things that we're dealing with when we're planning for emergencies, right, is engaging with a wide diversity of stakeholders, right? And those stakeholders are not just, maybe in the floor below us or above us in a different department or a different unit and things like that. They're folks who are outside of the building, members of the public, different community groups, private industry, so on and so forth. Bringing all those folks along and bringing is a whole process, right? And we often, we've heard the phrase endlessly, sort of the whole community. We need to engage the whole community in planning. The problem with that is not everybody in the whole community is on board with engaging in the process, and they need to be engaged effectively. And so that the methodology that you can employ to do that, and there are many tools that are in the toolbox that can be pulled out, from quality management to stakeholder management and communications, that can help with that process. Not every tool has to be employed, in that process. And that's one of those things that, given training and given time and let's say some period of apprenticeship, and as you gain skills and competencies, you gain that ability to engage with those people at the right level. It's like any sort of skill that you gain over time. The more that you practice it, the better that you get at it. And it's also gaining the feedback and awareness about what is effective and what's not effective in terms of how you employ those methods and tools.
So I again, I'm looking at this from the holistic approach when we're looking at emergency management in general. But for sure, when we're going into the planning process, when I mean the planning process, where we're looking at either updating our emergency operations plan, or like the case I'm working right now, I'm in the middle of this. Our local hazard mitigation plan. The principles that are in this book are are applied to what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And I thought that was pretty. And like I said, some of the lessons I learned in the workshop I did with you, I'm using here. I mean, if you look at you can't see it, but over here on the right hand side of me, I have a board with all these little stickies on here, and I'm moving them around and putting them where they need to be, and my timeline is done. I think that was a phenomenal class, and using those skills here. Um, so again, you're looking at the planning process. Why wouldn't you use this process? Like what? Like I don't understand like why people wouldn't want to use this, because I think it's in here. Cost benefit analysis isn't in here. I had to do a cost benefit analysis the other day, and you see this little tabby here. I had to look it up to help me with my head, and it helped me go through that process. I mean, it's like this is a really useful book, not just a textbook. This is a useful book on your bookshelf. You know.
And so it's good, very good to hear that that's the case, because essentially that's really what it was intended for, right? Is in quality management what we call fitness for purpose, which is it was intended for folks like us. And I'll tell you, you're not the only one. I actually have a copy at home, and I have a copy in the office, and also, of course, I have an electronic copy that I can go to, that I can refer to, and I refer to it fairly frequently to sort of go back. Okay, yes, was it that even some of the basic things like just follow-ups to meetings, to make sure that a lot of the stuff is ingrained in the work that I do, but I oftentimes will want to make sure that I'm covering all the bases just for some of the basic things, but also some of the tools that I'm using. One of the tools that I cover in risk management, but it's also applicable in quality, is bow tie analysis. So what essentially goes into a bow tie analysis, those sorts of things. So I refer to it quite frequently. To answer your original question, is why do people not want to use this? I think that there is a misunderstanding at times with, project management or using a management methodology is going to slow us down, or it's overhead, or it's something that's not a value added. And that may be true if it's just a bureaucratic procedure that you're just doing to check a box and fill something out. The words that go into a scope statement should have some meaning and should be beneficial to sort of elaborate what that picture is. Like if you're creating a roadmap, you want that roadmap to be as clear as possible, so that the signposts that you're going to be looking for are clear, where the turns are, where you have certain dangers that you might face in that, who's going to be in the car, when are you going to have to refuel, all these sorts of things. I mean, that's a journey, of course, but that journey has its analogy in the project world, to make sure who are the teams, what are the critical check-in points that you have to have, when do you have to have the funding available, how are you ensuring that you have your procurement procedures in process, and what you're purchasing, what's that purchasing vehicle going to be. Those are all things that you have to think about, right? And so you can think about that. The book sort of as that elaborate set of checklists. But I think it's in a better way to think about it as the methodology and a mindset of how you need to think about projects in a blue sky environment when you have the time and I would say the benefits of being able to really engage with people and to really think through how do we address these problems? How do we address these very thorny and difficult problems that we face day to day? Because as you know, when an emergency happens, it doesn't happen in an ideal environment. It doesn't happen at a scheduled time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody's rested and you have all the resources available and all of your trucks are ready to head out onto the road with no traffic and have access to fuel and so on and so forth, right? It happens when it's the most unideal situation and you've got to deal with that. And so those are all considerations, and that's part of the requirements and sort of scenario planning that we need to put into that. And that's actually at the very front end of the book, right? In terms of understanding, doing that type of risk identification and analysis, or FIRA or HIRA, however, whatever term you use for describing that initial process.
I'm laughing because you say, the ideal time to have an emergency is like at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. um, Actually, I'm going to say we had an earthquake at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was chaos because people were all on their phones, communications fell apart, all this kind of stuff. So I think like 2 in the morning would probably be a good time. 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but what jurisdiction is going to schedule a drill or an exercise or anything happening at 2 o'clock in the morning, right?
I don't understand if we had like an actual disaster.
No, but that's just it. That's when those things unfold. The Getty fire didn't start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at a convenient time for folks to have eyes on the situation. It happened around 2 o'clock in the morning or so, and that brush fire spread pretty quickly. Now, there's nothing you're going to do about trying to prevent that, but just the situational awareness and the monitoring is what's part of that picture. But one thing I just wanted to add real quickly to the whole, there's often a sense of urgency that people have. Let's just get to the work. Let's just start doing the work. And I think that it is part of the sort of makeup of many emergency managers that we want to jump into action and do something because doing something feels good. We know what we are good at. Let's pull people into a meeting and get them together and get them on the phone. How many conference calls have you been on when there's a briefing, an emergency, right? When it's not organized well, right? Mm-hmm. And you have people just jumping in and talking about things, but there's no sense of how are this organized? How are we, how is this being put together? Now, we have ICS, we have the planning P, we have those sorts of methodologies sort of built in. But imagine a project where someone says, let's just gather together and start working on this. It's going to wind up being a mess. And that's oftentimes what happens is if someone doesn't have a clear methodology and how they're planning and carrying out that project, it just becomes messy very quickly.
At the end of the day, if somebody goes to one of your workshops, and I want to talk about a workshop you have coming up in the New York metropolitan area here shortly, but if somebody goes to one of your workshops, what do they walk away with that they can implement? And I could give you the testament, but I want to hear from you. Like, what can you walk away with and implement like on day one? They go back to their office and boom, they're into it.
I mean, there's a lot of different things that folks I think can start implementing from day one. I think some of the essentials when we start off with is developing that scope of work. Sorry,
allergy season.
Like yourself, we have bad allergy season right here. Is developing that that scope of work, and beyond that scope of work, or part of that scope of work, is developing that work breakdown structure. And a work breakdown structure is just, for our viewers, listeners, is a hierarchical decomposition of all the work on the project. So you can think about it, starting from your goal, you're developing your deliverables, your phases, and then breaking that work down into tasks that build up to create those deliverables or those phases. They happen if you look at HCEAP and developing an exercise, whatever type, whether it's a tabletop exercise or functional exercise, it has a sort of process flow. Each of those processes sort of roll up to create your exercise plan, your evaluator's guide, and so on and so forth. All the different elements that or documents that need to be a part of that exercise. So those are some of the things I think they walk away with, in addition to some methodology for how to do scheduling and how to do cost estimating and those sorts of things. Those, I think, go a long way to help build a basic effective plan. I think the broader picture is having a framework, if you will, to be able to understand a project and how the pieces sort of work together. So a scope doesn't just sit in isolation. The scope is related to your schedule and to your budget. And in addition, there are also other elements that are part of that package. So a project plan is just not those three elements. It's also the quality plan. How do you define quality on a project? What are the quality assurance and quality control procedures you're going to be putting in place? And that includes who's responsible for them. How frequently are you going to be checking those sorts of things? What type of reporting are you putting in place? The risk management plan, procurement plans, communication plans, and stakeholder management. There's all those sorts of aspects that are really key to making sure this whole thing works. Because, in a large project, usually they have all those elements. You're not just purchasing or using resources internally. You're bringing those resources to bear, whether it's equipment, whether it's systems, whether it's supplies, or all those sorts of things, outside contractors or vendors that are doing some of the work that you're doing. Because I don't think there's any jurisdiction, including FEMA, which does not, utilize outside contractors these days for the work that they do.
Another quick question here, and I know we've been asking the hard questions of what like what are some of the hurdles? What's the easy what's the easy button when you come to this class, or when you look at this with project management? Like, when do you go, this makes sense, and it's like, there it is, it's easy? Or is there an easy button?
Well, let me just clarify. When you're talking about easy, you're talking about an aha moment where folks are like, aha, that makes sense to me.
Yes.
Now that you're doing that. I think it happens at various times, but I think usually there's 2 or 3 key points. One is when we either with a scope statement or a work breakdown structure, where folks say, okay, now this is helping me better wrap my arms around a project, because before I was thinking, I have this project, how do I break it down into manageable pieces? So that's one. I think the second one is on the scheduling side of things, in understanding, okay, I've done that initial part of breaking it down into bite-sized pieces and into tasks that we're going to do. How do I actually align these in a way that makes sense? And how do I create an actual realistic project plan? So, it's one thing to actually put the schedule into whatever, into Microsoft Project, or put it into Trello or Smartsheet or whatever software program that you're doing. But then you need to actually take into consideration all of the human factors, holidays, time that people are off, other events that are happening in the organization where you're not going to be able to schedule things. And you need to schedule around those items. And then there's also resource leveling that you need to do. In other words, individuals who may be borrowed from other parts of the organization or may have other work, we can't just dump more work onto them without knowing that, let's say in June or July or August, that they're going to have a big project that they're responsible for. Or if it's a fiscal year closing and it's a financial person, they may not be able to handle all the procurement documents at that time. They need them in advance. So being able to show what that looks like and have those realistic discussions with those resources to be able to illustrate them. And so oftentimes I'll see that aha moment when we've gone through all the process for scheduling and how that's done, and taking into consideration all those human factors. individuals go, okay, now this is starting to make some sense. Now I see how I can anticipate and deal with some of those scheduling challenges.
So I'm going to ask you another, practical question here. Um, we're working on I am personally working on our local hazard mitigation plan. I know this is a big thing right now with all the changes that FEMA has done and
Mhm.
whatnot. People are going to go through this and one of those projects we have to do every 5 years, right? Um, how can somebody who's going through that planning process apply what you have here in this book to that a project like that?
So I mean, so you can think about that as a project, right? Your first, each of those processes that are in a THIRA or a HIRA, whatever, again, whatever term you want to use, it's, we're we're, based on the jurisdiction or the organization, and what are the major risks that it faces. So identifying risks, assessing risks, analyzing those risks, and then coming up with some sort of mitigation plan, if that's part of that process, right? Identifying what the options are to address those risks, either putting some mitigation measures in place or prevention measures, transferring risks, those sorts of things, or in some cases accepting them and so forth. And then, that builds into those sort of elements, right? Those are major phases of that process, right? Of that risk, assessment and analysis. That then goes into, okay, now we have the basic building blocks. We build our plan out based upon that, right? And then we review it and assess it, and then that goes into, it goes into some sort of implementation, right? Of what further if we think about that project itself then spawns all the other projects, right? There's an integration into, let's say that your jurisdiction, you're based out in the beautiful California coast there, and you deal with either not enough water or too much water. So it's either feast or famine or drought and flooding. You have atmospheric rivers that you deal with, and so from time to time, and so so flood mitigation is one of those big aspects. So how do we allocate funding for flood mitigation for critical infrastructure in order to protect that? You have your the words are failing me right now, but basically you've got your different uh, canals and whatnot and things like that, to basically shed water away. But how do you harden those? How do you increase those to deal
We
with
call those rivers in
what,
California.
what's that?
And so we call those rivers in California, but they're
Rivers.
really just flood control channels.
Rivers. Right. So, yeah. So you've got stormwater drains, those sorts of things. How do you reinforce them? How do you enhance them to deal with impacts of whether you want to recognize it or not, but the changes in climate that are taking place that are increasing the frequency and intensity of those types of storms and impacts.
Absolutely. Now, I know that, you can't just, I guess you could. Some people pick up a book and read it and learn. But you do offer workshops. I
Mhm.
know you have one coming up. First of all, let's talk about what a workshop entails. Tell people how they can get a hold of you to have a workshop put on in their jurisdiction. And then let's talk about the one you have coming up.
Sure. So one thing I wanted to note is just in the chat, it's the actual link to the book and at least to the information a little bit about some of the work that I do in delivering workshops is PM4EM. So I think there was PM4WM, unless that was another site unrelated to
Oh,
mine.
it's called bad typing.
Okay.
It's called bad typing, Andrew.
So
Yeah,
it's PM4EM,
there, it's fixed.
the number four, and so individuals, if they would like to get a hold of me, can contact me simply at Andrew at PM4EM.com, and I'm happy to respond to them if they're interested. Um, and so I did want to mention that yes, I do. We do have a workshop that's coming up in here, and it's actually being put on for Region 2. And I can put a. Is there a way I can put a link into the chat here,
Yeah,
or I
absolutely.
can,
Yeah, link in there, and I'll put it up.
let me just let me put it into the private chat, because I'm not sure if I have access to your. So and folks, so I believe that, so that's open for folks who are in Region 2 and I think Region 3. Although if you're in Region 1, I know that's maybe a little bit further away in New England. We can certainly probably accommodate you if you'd like to join us. And if you happen to be an IAEM member from another region who wants to come to beautiful New Jersey to attend it, it's going to be at Rowan University outside of Philadelphia. So that's southern New Jersey, or people who live in central New Jersey would call it central New Jersey, because it's not like south. So it's like with California, right? With California folks will say Southern California, but people who are really, if San Francisco and that Monterey area, really central California, if
Yeah,
you're
it's
looking
not
at the map of California, because but they would consider San Francisco Northern California. In any case,
we call it Northern California for those of us in SoCal, but the people in Northern California, like Shasta and all that, they don't like the idea that San Francisco's up there. So we can talk about geopolitics all day long too.
okay, I'll leave that one aside for now, and just get back to the workshop. So it's a shortened version of what is a 3-day workshop that I like to run. It's a 2-day very condensed workshop that we'll be running. It will be hands-on, so it's not, unlike the reason I call it a workshop. It is very much, I want individuals bringing their projects into our classroom, so to speak, to work on. So similar to what you experienced when we ran this in California just before the national conference. Folks brought in their projects for basically procuring and operationalizing emergency radio usage and radio protocols. Folks will bring in exercise training, TTXs, tabletop exercises, or how to put together functional exercise, or how do I develop a plan for housing asylum seekers. That's one that I've seen recently. So it really runs the gamut. It can also be implementation of new systems and things like that. So it's very exciting to see that work going on, because the folks who are attending are actually working on their projects and solving problems together, co-creating with the folks who are there. And so and then they have that opportunity to then go back to their office. And I it's one of those things, I offer folks an opportunity to contact me after the workshop if they want to follow up, if they have any quick questions. So it's not like they just come in and they leave and that's it. I'm happy to engage with them afterwards. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good class, and I had a lot of fun. It sounds funny that you have fun in a project management class, but we got to stand up, work around. It's not just sitting there listening to people talk. It's interactive, 100%. And I worked on 2 different projects in that class, just to kind of get a different, because sort of getting a flavor for everything. And it's amazing how the process worked well, working for both those projects that were completely different. So it's something that you're gonna learn, take away from, walk away with this book. I think I highly recommend it. I highly recommend taking one of Andrew's courses if you have the opportunity to. Um, and I think it's well worth the time. And we got Dustin here watching from East Tennessee. All right. Thank you for that. Um, and so, yeah, it's an awesome course. Is there anything else that, before we let you go, that you want to wrap up with and share, or, just buy the book?
well, a couple things. One is I have had a number of speaking engagements to talk about the book. I was at the National Hurricane Conference. I was at the New York State Emergency Management Association conference, and probably a few others that I forget at this point. But what I have experienced is folks will tell me this is really great. It's really timely. The book is intended both as a handbook for emergency managers to be able to use. It's also intended as a potential textbook because I've been using aspects of this to teach this type of course at the academic level for almost 4 or 5 years. And one of the courses I teach in this area is at John Jay College. It's part of the City University of New York in their Master's in Emergency Management program. And I have students who I taught many years ago who are now progressing in their careers. And so what's nice is that I'm able to interact with them. They're able to provide their feedback. The one thing that I have heard on many occasions, and these are my students' words, not mine, is that out of the courses that they took when they were in college, that this was one of the more useful ones that they've been able to apply in their work. And that's, that's very encouraging to hear. And with the folks who do read this, who are out there, I'm open to hearing your feedback. So I'd like to hear what you liked in the book, what you didn't like in the book, maybe what you'd like to see more of. In that vein of, continuous improvement, I'm taking notes in the copy that I have here at my desk. Every once in a while, I'll put in notes as to, for version 2, this is what I want to include. It might include additional scenarios or case studies outside in different types of jurisdictions, and then maybe incorporating some additional methodologies on how to deal with certain planning aspects and things like that. So, and the other thing I'll just mention just briefly is that there's certain sections of the book. So for example, there's a section on, I think as you sort of aptly put it, when you are dealing with an emergency, that is a very complex project, right? And so if you've done your project planning ahead of time and you have good, solid operational plans and capabilities and sort of that sort, then you're implementing that. But then there will always be things that you have to actually deploy, which might not be what you had planned originally. So some of that sort of in that situation or at the moment of crisis where you have to go through that very fast OODA loop, so to speak, observing, orienting, making a decision, and taking action, there will be some time where you have to work with other people. And using some of these tools, maybe not all the tools, maybe not sitting there and creating an elaborate work breakdown structure, but being able to utilize what you can. There's some advanced tools, let's say for probabilistic and conditional type of planning that I think are very effective that can be brought into the field. And some of these things emergency managers do, and especially experienced folks who've been out in the field for a while or have been in an EOC or wherever they have been based or been deployed to, it may not be explicit in terms of how they do it. And so to me, that's an opportunity for us to take what folks might be practicing or has been practiced out there and then bringing it into sort of an area to say, here's what this practice might look like.
Yeah, and it's broken up into parts, right? So part 1 is setting up the base camp for projects. Part 2 is project management foundations and planning a course of action. And then your part 3 is strategic project management. So it's broken down in an easy to use book. Like I said, first of all, I think I was remiss in saying congratulations on getting this book out, because that's a lot of work that you put into this. And it's finally, I know you've been doing this for a bit and it's finally come true for you. So I'm proud of you and congratulations on this. Second of all, it's well put together, well laid out, and it is so easy to use. And like I said, I'm already starting to tab it for work. I have it here in my office, utilizing it with this project I'm working on right now. Matter of fact, I'm going to go in a little bit to a meeting on another project plan that we're using. I'm bringing this book with me. So it's like I said, it's a useful book. It's not something that you just buy for eye candy. It's used. You can use it every day. So, Andrew, thank you so much for putting this together for all of us in emergency management. I think that it's going to be one of those books that's going to be well used and well referenced.
Yeah. So just briefly, so I think as you stated, the book is broken up into three major parts. The first part is really sort of giving us an orientation. What are we talking about when we're talking about project management, and how does that feed into, how does it relate to emergency management, and a little bit about my origin story. And then part two gets into the basics, the sort of the meat and potatoes, if you will, of project management planning. And then part three gets into that strategic approach. How do we look at portfolios and programs, and how do we actually look at the quality management aspect, that total quality improvement of what we do in emergency management, and how do those projects sort of feed that loop, so to speak. And then the last sort of bit is leadership and projects, and what do we do as far as next steps. If you want to look at it's the book, the table of contents is available on Amazon. I believe they have you can get a free chapter on Amazon as well, that you can download and read on a Kindle reader or on screen reader, or on a screen to be able to read it, that sort of thing. And one thing I'll also mention, I do have a podcast on the subject called Riding the Wave: Project Management for Emergency Managers. And Todd, you've been a guest on that show a couple of times. I've been fortunate to speak to you further about your work. Happy to answer any questions that anyone has, that want to pose them to me, want to send me an email, and reach out to me. Happy to speak to you. My audio's dropped.
It's like, I guess if you could unmute it after I coughed. Andrew, it was a pleasure speaking to you, and as always, it's great seeing you. And again, if anybody needs to get a hold of Andrew, it's PM4EM, PM4EM, Andrew at PM4EM.com, not WM. So that's a whole other world. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to them. You can find them on LinkedIn. You can find them, through the PM4EM, and you can always just Google them. You'll find them. You're out there, Professor Andrew Boyarsky, right there, and doing some great work. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure, and looking forward to staying in touch.